Welcome to Mostly Minutia. I'm Colleen Lindell. This is episode 10, Life of Purpose.
Every year, 800,000 people have a stroke. About a third of those will die. It is the third leading cause of death in the United States, behind heart attack, heart disease, and cancer. Heart disease is number one, cancer is number two.
This is Sal Valdez reading from his memoir he's writing, titled Conversations with My Sons. Sal was a teacher for 30 years in the Los Angeles Unified School District. He spent 15 years working as an elementary school teacher and 15 more years in special education. And Sal was not your typical teacher. While some teachers brought their briefcases to school, Sal was bringing his guitar. He played a lot of music and read a lot to his students. He also prided himself on letting each student know he cared for them. And it wasn't unusual for Sal to make a home visit just to spend time talking with their parents and getting to know them. Sal was also very involved with community organizing. He held a position with the teachers union where he got to work on policy. He was also a marathon runner and an avid hiker. Sal felt he was at the apex of his career when in 2006, while on vacation with his wife Martha in the Sequoias, he suffered a massive stroke.
After I had a stroke, I prayed to God. But I was also angry at God. I had a lot of anger at God. I was like, how could you let this happen to me? I was doing everything the right way. I was leading a good life. I have a family. Had a job where I was helping kids and families. How could you let this happen to me? Why me? But what I didn't know is I have a hereditary condition that causes my blood to clot. I didn't know that until I was already in the hospital, and I kept developing clots in my limbs. So they did a DNA test, and when the neurologist, when he got the results, he came to me and he asked me, do you have European ancestry? So I gave him a quick history lesson about the Spanish defeating the Aztecs and intermarrying with the Aztecs. He said, no, more recently. And I said, not that I know of. Why? And then he told me that I have a hereditary blood condition that's called Leiden factor 5. Leiden is a city in the Netherlands where it was first discovered. And what it does is the blood in my body tends to clot for no reason. But it's the reason my father died of a stroke, as did my grandfather. But they never knew what hit him. I had to have my whole family checked. Well, it turns out my youngest sister has it, and my oldest son has it. So they take the necessary precautions. They take one baby aspirin a day, and that's all they have to do. What I came to realize is that if it wouldn't have happened to me, it could have been my oldest son or my youngest sister. So in that respect, better it happened to me. Better me. I was born in Mexico in 1955, but we came with my parents and my brothers and sister when I was a little boy, like 3 years old. My mom is from the state of Durango in Mexico, and my dad is from a state adjacent. Coahuila is the name of it. My dad was a butcher. He worked in a slaughterhouse in the city of Vernon. It was like a disassembly line, and he had his place in the line where he did one act repeatedly. My dad, before he came, he was a steel worker in Mexico. He worked in a steel foundry for 15 years, and then once here, he worked in a slaughterhouse for 30 years. So he was a hard-working man. The interesting thing is, all 6 of us went on to college, and we all got our college degree. My younger brother is a principal of a high school here in Los Angeles. My older brother is a school teacher at a local East LA elementary school. My sister just retired this year from her teaching job. She was also a school teacher. I grew up in Echo Park section of Los Angeles. And in that area at the time, it was known as a place with a lot of gangs and drugs. I noticed that a lot of my friends that I grew up with, they were drifting into gangs or into drugs or even going to jail. And I was very uncomfortable with that because I didn't want that for myself. I applied to college, and I went to a small college up north, St. Mary's College in the town of Moraga, California. I was unsure of what kind of career path I was going to take, but I went to the career counselors, and then I had friends that were school teachers, and I visited them in their classrooms, and that made a big impact on me. I thought that was something that I would like to do, to work with children. After college, I worked at a job training center in San Jose. They would train farm workers that wanted to leave the fields and work in the city. We would have people that would go out to the fields and pass out information about free job training and sign up people. And my job was to find jobs for them. And I got to meet a lot of great people there. I met Cesar Chavez there. When I was at St. Mary's, I took a semester off and I went to live in Delano, which was his headquarters for the Farm Workers Union. And I went to work there with the farm workers for about 6 months. We would work during the day, and then we'd have a communal meal, and then he would come and he would speak to us. The interesting thing is, he was usually soft-spoken, like if you talk to him one-on-one, but when it was time for him to address a crowd of people, then he could be very charismatic. It became part of my formation as a man. That had a profound effect on me. I did that for 3 years. Then I went to USC for 1 year. I entered into the teacher training program at USC, but I could only afford 1 year, and so I transferred to Cal State LA, and that's where I got my teaching credential. I started working as a teacher in 1981. I was given the keys to the classroom, and the principal pointed out, "Those are your students over there. Good luck to you." It's on the job training almost. Things you try, they don't work, so you gotta try something different to make it work. And you gotta get to know your students. I was always very curious about the students and their families, not just the students, but their families. So I worked closely with their parents as well. And I had tricks. I was the coach of a baseball team in the area, and I had some of my toughest students. I put them on the team, and I would hold it over them. I would say, "If you don't do your homework, you're not going to get to play on Saturday." And it would work. Whatever needed to be reinforced at school, I could constantly talk to the parents. I would go to their homes. I became a very good teacher. I felt I was at the apex of my teaching career when I had a stroke. And I felt that was my mission in life, to work with the kids, to teach them, to prepare them for the world. And not just them, but their families, their parents as well. I was a classroom teacher for 15 years before I went into special education. But I noticed that I always spent a lot of time with the kids that were having trouble at school. And that's when I began to learn about learning disabilities. I mean, I knew about it from my college coursework, but it's one thing to read about it in a textbook, but when you come face to face with a student that can't remember the sound of a letter because they have a learning disability, well then I wanted to learn more about that field. And so I went back to college and I got my special education certificate so I could work with learning disabled students.
I was wondering, what do you think made you have compassion for people that were struggling like that?
I think that things like empathy are taught at a young age, and I was taught by my parents to care for others, and to care for what happens in the world. And that became very much a part of who I am.
There's a real special quality to you, Sal, because wherever you go, you're actually interested in the people.
I've always been interested in people, in their stories. Where do they come from? What was their childhood like? Where do their parents come from? And I think that sometimes people are too passive. Things happen to them, as opposed to being an agent in your own life and taking responsibility for what happens to you and your life. I had a student once that he would not bring in his homework, and one day I asked him, "What's going to happen tomorrow? Are you going to bring your homework in?" And he told me, "I can't predict the future." So I told him, "Oh, no, you don't understand. You make the future by what you do today." And I had to convince him that he could actually do something with his young life, something positive. And he did, he turned it around and he started bringing in his homework daily. But it took a great effort. In my school, I became known as the go-to teacher. If there was a student at the school that was having a real hard time, they would say, let's put him in Mr. Valdez's classroom. He can handle him. And of course, the problem was, in one school there might be a whole bunch of students like that. So when you have a whole classroom of kids that are having a lot of problems, well, that becomes very problematic. But I was able to manage that quite well. And the key is for the student to know that I care about him. The student doesn't care how many degrees you have or how many credentials you have. All he or she wants to know is, do you care about me and am I safe here? And I did that in part by meeting with their parents so they could see that, I cared about them enough to go to their house. So then it became a whole team effort. It wasn't just me, it was the parents and me to help the child along.
I wanted to ask you, how did you and Martha meet each other?
We met in college. I was a senior at Santa Clara University, and she was a freshman. We took a class together. We took a math class, and she was struggling with it, so I tutored her. And then I was involved with community stuff, so I took her to her first demonstration, but I told her, don't worry, I'll take care of you. Martha saved my life, there's no question. Mm-hmm. She saved my life, and now she's trying to save my soul. So we're really good for each other, because I watch over her and she watches over me, and it's been that way for 36 years.
Well, why do you say she's trying to save your soul?
Well, because she holds me accountable. If I get lazy, if I don't want to walk, she'll tell me, do you want to sit on that wheelchair all your life? Every step requires intense concentration on my part. Can you imagine having to concentrate on every step that you take? I sit somewhere, maybe at a park, and I'll watch the people walking by so effortlessly, there's a little bit of a yearning that happens. But I've worked hard. I thought running the marathon was the hardest physical thing I ever would have to do. It wasn't. Learning to walk again, learning to take those first steps, that was what was really hard. We would go to that cabin complex 2 or 3 times a year with my sons, with the whole family. It was kind of an inexpensive vacation, and it was there that I had a stroke one morning. I was trying to reach the Kern River by going over the nearest hill and then down. I knew the river was to the east, so I headed east over the nearest hill. And when I got to the top of the hill, I started going down, and I could see the river, but it was very far, and it started to get dark. So I turned back, and by the time I got back, I was really tired. So I went to sleep, and the next morning I woke. I was having a stroke. I couldn't move my left arm or my left leg, and so I tried to walk it off, but I fell down. But my wife was with me. She's not a very strong woman, but she managed to get me up and sit me on the bed. But I was still not feeling well, so I tried to walk again, to walk it off, whatever it was. Of course, I went down again. I went down 3 times, and 3 times Martha got me up, until she finally left me on the floor with a pillow and a blanket, and she went to get help. There happened to be this young man just walking by on a hike, and she got him to come into the cabin and help me up off the floor and down the stairs into my car. And then she drove me to the office where we were going to wait for the ambulance. My head felt like it was going to explode. I had such a terrible headache, and my left side was in terrible pain, real bad pain. It was hard even to take a breath. And then I think I must have gone into shock, because when I woke, I was at a clinic, and they were talking about taking me by helicopter. which didn't happen because the helicopter didn't work. By the time I got to the hospital, it had already been hours, so I had already suffered permanent damage on the right side of my brain, which affected the left side of my body, my left arm and leg. I have recovered a lot of movement in my leg, but not in my arm. To this day, I'm unable to move my arm or open my hand, but I know that will not prevent me from living a full and meaningful life of purpose and meaning, which is my goal. I was in the acute rehab unit for people that had brain traumas or other kinds of traumas that needed rehabilitation, like physical therapy, occupational therapy, which I received on a daily basis. And I consult with some of those same doctors and therapists to this day. Good people. If I wouldn't have had a stroke, I wouldn't have met them. The days in the hospital were not too bad because Martha would come every day and sit by my side, or I had family and friends that would come to visit me in the hospital. So the days were okay, but the nights were bad because then the bad feelings would wash over me. I was always the primary financial supporter of the family. How was I going to support my family now? How am I ever going to walk in a mountain trail again? I cried. I had a deep cry. I worried the nurses, I'm afraid. I had to get it out. It was a catharsis. When I came home, it was very hard. I couldn't even get out of bed by myself because half my body was paralyzed. And when I saw how much help I needed, I talked to my wife and I told her, Martha, you should leave me. This is no life for you. You should leave me. People would understand. And she paused for a moment, and then she looked at me and she said, if the roles were reversed, is that what you would do? When we took a vow about that part, remember that part about in sickness and in health? Well, that's what this is. So I never broached that subject again. I noticed that I was not as fast on my feet as I was before. What I mean is, I had to think about things. It would take me a little longer to catch things. And sometimes, if people were talking too fast, I would have to ask them to slow down because I needed time to process. I was depressed, and I suffered from PTSD. I've never been a violent man, but there were times when I would go into a rage. I would throw things, even in the office of my therapist, and she would call me down. She would say, look around the room, what do you see? I'd say, well, I see photographs of you and your family. You're not in the mountains. You're here in my office. I would go back to that place, and that's what would set me off. And when I was in the ambulance, they strapped me down too tightly, and I could barely breathe, and I was trying to tell them, but I couldn't enunciate. They didn't understand me. I don't even like to wear seat belts, but I do, because I know it's for my own safety. But I hate to be strapped down, and it would set me off. Little things like that would set me off. But I had a very good therapist that gave me tricks to how to get out of it. Like just by looking around and talking to myself. I'm not back there. I'm in the now. I'm not in the past. There's a stigma about therapy, but for me, it was a lifesaver. It's no wonder that a lot of stroke survivors fall into depression because they try to fix things themselves and they're unable to. They don't have the tools. Because the other part that has saved me is my support network around me. Of course, starting with my wife, but my sons and my brothers and sisters, all of whom are alive. It's a tremendous support system to have your siblings around you and that you can count on them. After a time, I started volunteering in a former school where I used to work at. My son would take me in the morning. One day we were in the car and he looked at me and he said, Dad, you didn't shave the left side of your face. And I said, what? And I grabbed the mirror and sure enough, my right side was cleanly shaving, but my left side was full of whiskers. It's because I have something called left field neglect. I'm not aware of things to the left side, which is my weak side. My son doesn't like going with me because I have a bad habit. Like, he went with me one time to this class, and of course there were a lot of young students, young men and women, and I made the comment, young ladies out there, my son is a bachelor, in case you're interested. Oh my God, I didn't hear the end of it. Oh, he was so mad at me.
Sal, it's so embarrassing.
Yes, he told me, Dad, don't you ever do that to me again. I was always very independent and active, and I wanted to attempt to continue that independence and activeness. And so I learned to take the bus, and because I'm on a wheelchair, I only pay 50 cents. That's a great deal. What can you do for 50 cents? I can go all the way downtown with 50 cents. I go to the library, and they have a little cafeteria there. So I know the workers there. So they're happy to see me, and I'm happy to see them. They ask about me. I ask about them, their lives. And I've come to know many of the librarians that work there, especially in the history department. They're like, "What are you looking for today, Mr. Valdez?" I went to therapy in this place in the valley called Center for Neuro Skills, and they had a sign, and it had a picture of some guy in a wheelchair, and it had that quote, "The body is silent, but the spirit stirs." And it had an impact on me, because I felt I was that way. My body might be immobile, but my spirit is alive. My yearning to live a good life, a life of purpose, a life of meaning, which is what everybody seeks in the world. One of my occupational therapists was actually a professor at Cal State Dominguez Hills. He has invited me to his class to speak to his occupational therapy students. They have a lot of questions for me about my rehabilitation. They have a lot of questions for Martha too, because the stroke did not just affect me, she's been with me the whole 9 years, every step of the way. So how has that affected her? Those are valid questions.
What projects are you guys working on? What are some of your passion projects?
Most recently, I cruise up and down the streets of East Los Angeles a lot. Sometimes I encounter a place where I can't get through because the sidewalk is so bad. There's uplifting on the sidewalk because of tree roots, or it's cracked. It's dangerous. So that's a simple, small thing. And so I've been doing a lot of that recently. And so last year, I received a certificate from the LA County Commission on Disabilities for the first district. They gave me an award for promoting public service and accessibility because of my work with sidewalks. If it's just yourself, it's easy for them to overlook you or to shove you into this bureaucratic maze that has no end. But if you get together some of your neighbors, and that's where I did well, I could put together a team of people in my neighborhood that know me from before I had a stroke, that knew my activism from before, that knew what I was about. So I can call on these people. If need be, we'll go to the office and speak to the supervisor of the people in charge of streets and sidewalks. And if need be, we'll hold a press conference, and I'll be there with my wheelchair, and I'll say, "Look, I can't get by here."
Do you love LA, by the way?
Very much so. I love this city. It has so many rich neighborhoods. Like I grew up in Echo Park. What a great place that is. I've lived the last 30 years in East Los Angeles. It's a great place. People are hard-working, wonderful people here. And I worked in South LA as a teacher, what they used to call South Central. And great people there too. I'd heard of the Watts Towers, but I had never been there until I worked at a school by there. And then I drove over, and I parked, and I went to see the Watts Towers. It's an amazing piece of work. And that Randy Newman song, I love that song because, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, He says Santa Monica Boulevard, we love it. And then he says 6th Street, we love it. Well, 6th Street is the heart of Skid Row. Los Angeles is the homeless capital of the nation. And 6th Street is the main center of that homelessness. So for Randy Newman to say 6th Street, we love it. Well, that's sarcasm, but that's good because it brings it out. What are we doing about homelessness? I have a homeless friend that I met on the street. His name is Dan Doherty. He worked 10 years in the Merchant Marines. He had a wife and he had 2 sons. He gave it all up.
But why did he give it all up?
That's what I asked him. I said, Dan, you're a smart guy. What happened to you? And he told me one word: alcohol. It's hard for me to comprehend giving up your family for alcohol, but I know it's a disease. It's an addiction that has taken control of your life. And so when I see him, I don't judge him. Instead, I ask him if he's eaten, and we go have a bite to eat. And I remember the words that, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Now, I don't think I would ever be homeless. I have too much of a support network. But he is like a brother to me. If I don't see him for 2 or 3 days, I start worrying. I ask him, where do you sleep, Dan? I need to know in case I don't see you, because I'm going to go looking for you one day, I'm afraid. One day I asked him, do you want me to contact your sons? He told me their names. And he said, no, I don't want to bother them. They have their own life to live. So what I thought is, he's from Seaside, New Jersey. I thought of putting an advertisement in the local paper there. Somebody must know him there. He's a nice guy. I read a book that has made a big impact on me by Viktor Frankl. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, a Jewish man who ended up in Auschwitz. All around him, every day people were dying, but not everybody. Some persevered, some lived. And he posed the question, what is it that makes some people live and some people give up? And his hypothesis was that the ones that lived, they had a purpose to their life that was not complete yet. His wife was also there. He would just think about his wife and the love that they had for each other. And he said something like, love is the ultimate goal that man can aspire to, man or woman can aspire to. For it is through love and in love that we reach our highest potential. And that made a big impact on me. I thought about my own life and the love I have in my life with my wife of 36 years, my 2 sons, and my little granddaughter. She gives my life purpose and meaning because I want to be a part of her life. I want to watch her grow up and be a part of her life as she goes to high school, she goes to the prom, hopefully to college. Well, I want to be a part of all that. So that means I have to live. So she inspires me to live. And if I'm going to live, I want to live as healthy as I can. So I need to walk. That's why I walk every day. I walk. I push myself. I'm up to about 300 feet now. For me, that's really good. And really, my goal is to be able to comfortably walk from my seat in the airplane to the restroom and back. Because if I can do that, then I can travel. And I want to go to Europe.
I was actually wondering if you could explain why you love sequoias so much.
There's something very magical about those trees. They're the biggest living things on earth by size and volume. I've come across trees that were around when Jesus walked the earth over 2,000 years ago. That's how old some of these trees are. So it's a connection to almost a prehistoric time. I feel like it's a part of divinity. It's a connection to the divine. I chose a big tree once and I walked around it. Sadly, I don't remember how many steps it took me, but when I went back to my elementary school, outside in the yard, with yarn, we measured out that distance so they could see how the diameter of that tree. Well, nobody could believe it. The kids were like, no, there's no way a tree could be this big. But it was like the size of a classroom, just the trunk. Yes, they're an amazing thing.
If you'd like to see a picture of Sal and his beautiful wife Martha standing next to a sequoia, or Sal with his award from the Los Angeles County Commission on Disabilities for his promotion of public service and accessibility, you can find them at colleenlindell.com. Thank you, Sal, for your transparency and honesty about both your difficulties and hopes. I stand in solidarity with you, and I hope for your strength and recovery to be able to walk to the restroom on the plane and back. I want to also thank Chris Collins. Chris, thank you for letting me use your wonderful music. You can find Chris' album, Indie Music Box, at indiemusicbox.com. I also used a few tracks from the group Message to Bears from the album Maps, which you can find at bandcamp.com. And I used a couple tracks by Chris Zabriskie. One is Candle Power, the other is Jason X. You can find Chris at bandcamp.com. That's Chris Zabriskie, Zabriskie. And all the links are on my site as well. Lastly, thank you to a friend who let me know my contact page on my site was out of commission. It's been fixed, so I apologize to anyone who was trying to send a note and couldn't. As always, I value your encouragement and comments. I'm also on Twitter at Colleen Lindell. Your words are like gold to me, and your ears are like sacred ground. This episode was recorded on location in East Los Angeles.